And that, again, that
trying to divide people, but like it did seem really artificial that just all of a sudden you would see commenters. I mean, even when YouTube first came out, like a lot of the 9/11 Truth commenters seemed to be like like into TV fakery, and it just didn't seem to reflect the reality on the ground. You know, when you would meet other real life 9/11ers,
exactly.
that was what seemed really somehow fake to me at the beginning of when all this started, and also the fact that it was largely propelled by a Bush like labor Department of Labor guy named Morgan Reynolds,
Yeah.
came out of the Bush administration, and then he gets some of the first Fox News spots, similar to Stephen Jones, to talk about 9/11, and all he does is pushes TV fakery. I think he even brought up the coyote from Looney Tunes breaking through like a boulder or something, like
Yeah.
that
Something like that.
that the plane hitting the World Trade Center looks like that or something like like live on Fox News. So and then I think Judy Wood. A lot of people will say like
Oh,
maybe she's a Fed or something, but I never thought that about her. To me, what it almost seemed like is they almost like Stephen Jonesified her, and there did seem to be like an artificial group of really hardcore, dogmatic Judy Wood, you know, directed energy weapon people who sort of took over all these spaces, and they would even confront people at like 9/11 events, and again, no proof that any of these people were feds or plants, but it didn't seem to reflect an organic, part of the movement. It just sort of almost just seemingly came out of nowhere and caused all these problems. And it's like, where is this
well,
coming from? So
there's no question that debunkers were agenda driven. They would ignore things that, information to make their arguments, and there were no question that there were campaigns to promote these theories on on a multitude of different websites, in the comment sections and stuff like that. And um, you know, it, again, it didn't seem organic. It seemed like somebody was trying to screw with us, and they ultimately were successful, I think, in a lot of ways, unfortunately. And in 2006, I think we made Time magazine. They finally covered us or something to that effect, and you know, I forget, but yeah, there were definitely campaigns that seemed like they were people not from the government, but maybe just organizations friendly to the government or friendly to different politicians that were paying people to get online to promote this stuff. Like Robbie said, when you meet people in the real world, they were like, I see this stuff online, and I'm like, yeah,
yeah,
that's crazy. And that's the stuff that the media focused on in an attempt to discredit us. They would always focus on the most ridiculous theories, the most ridiculous people like Alex Jones. And I want to talk about some of the TV appearances of people that made it on television. I would beg them and beg them to please mention the 9/11 family members, to please mention their unanswered questions, to please bring up the ridiculousness of the 9/11 Commission every single time. And never once did any of those people, not Kevin Barrett, not Stephen Jones, not Richard Gage, not whoever got on the television, none of them ever did that. And you know, I think, again, by design, the media's job was to pretty much discredit us to the best of their ability.
and, I mean, and you can also argue there was a lot of stuff seeded into the movement from day one. Like Gumby brought up Terry Mason's book. I mean,
Right.
just the idea
Which
that
was translated into 29 different languages, I think.
yeah, and just to make it to deduce it all down, and like not even talking about the buildings or these wackier theories, but like even in David Ray Griffin's books, he's talking about how all the family's voices on those phone calls could have been done through voice morphing technology and things like that. And when you really boil it down, it's like that is a really dicey place to go, and does make you look crazy to suggest that all of that was fake. And
Well,
so that
to
and that
me,
was there from day one. I mean, I remember people
yeah,
talking.
to me, it's no different than what Alex Jones did to the Sandy Hook families. By saying they were never killed, they were crisis actors, whatever the hell he was saying. When you say that the phone calls are fake, you're essentially taking a shot at the family members who may very well have who received those phone calls. I don't even want to go down the path, that the phone calls were fake, because I think they were real. And the guy, Jesse Ventura, had a show, Conspiracy Theory or something, and he had a guy on who was an expert on, voice morphing, if that's what you want to call it. And he had him on to show that you could do voice morphing, but he didn't actually realize why Jesse had him on, to make the argument that on 9/11 it could have happened. When he found out about it, he was furious, the expert that he had on. And he said that it could never, ever be done in real time. So, and again, David Ray Griffin continually promoted voice morphing, when he could see that I don't understand. None of the leaders of the 9/11 truth movement, which were the authors and the speakers and such, ever gave direction to the people of the 9/11 truth movement on how best to reach people, on what not to focus on trying to stay away from the infighting. And as a result, people like me and other experienced people in the movement came out with something called the 2008 Declaration, which is available at truthmove.org. And I would still show people that today, on how, the best ways to do this, to try and do this. Because the leaders, so-called leaders, weren't doing that. They were active participants in it.
Well, you mentioned one of the big personalities who I think kind of looms large over the truth movement and how it's perceived by the public, which is Alex Jones. And I think Robbie maybe has some more direct experience with being an Alex Jones listener and following that path for a little bit. And Jon maybe has more of the antagonistic point of view from that early stage. So I'm wondering how Alex, I went back and listened to it. Alex Jones was on the air live on 9/11 talking about in real time, basically developing kind of spitballing theories. Joe Rogan calls in at one point and they have a whole conversation about, it basically just spitballing theories in real time. And behold the pale horse, but his name is escaping me right now. He was on the air at the same time, taking pot shots at Alex Jones while also doing his own spitballing theories on 9/11. Yeah. Yes, of course. Yeah, William Cooper. So, but anyway, I'm just curious about, because Alex Jones and Bill Cooper, of course, dies, maybe 2 months after 9/11, something like that. And so the reins for that kind of thing get passed on to Alex Jones by default because, he's on the radio. So I'm just wondering how Alex Jones, for the both of you, kind of plays into how the truth movement developed and how it got maybe discredited in a lot of people's eyes.
Do you want me to go first, or Robbie?
Sure, yeah, you can go first, Jon.
Well, there were organizations like Media Matters, which was supposed to be monitoring the media, which is bad and so forth, that would portray him as the leader of the 9/11 truth movement, to help discredit us. And they would have him on, the media would have him on constantly and portray him and portray all of us as if we were no different than he was. And our signs used to say, support the 9/11 family members, ask questions, demand answers, stop the 9/11 cover-up. And then they started to say things like, New World Order, 9/11 was an inside job. And I think Alex had a lot to do with that. There was a time when I used to give him some slack because he managed to get the guests on his show. And if you remember, he would do his absolute best to get them to say the magic words, 9/11 was an inside job. And, when he did that, suddenly that became an article on his website. Such and such a person says 9/11 was an inside job. But yeah, no, there were two camps at one time. There was the Rupert camp and the Alex Jones camp, and I was very much part of the Rupert camp, even though Mike and I disagreed on a couple of things. But go ahead, Robbie, tell us about Alex Jones and how he just helped to discredit the movement.
Well, so I remember first getting into Alex Jones sometime around the time of that beheading hoax video that I made. And I remember it just sort of, at first, I remember thinking, okay, a lot of the stuff, coming off his website and his radio show is probably disinfo or misinfo, but he seems, like I was really enticed by sort of his aggressive, and he would his aggressive attitude and how he would project himself as being this bipartisan figure who was against the left and right paradigm and things like that. So his like conservatism, even though I didn't care for it, it didn't bother me that much at the same time because he was like vehemently against all the Bush era figures, even people on Fox News like Hannity, he would bash, and so would his other, info. I don't remember if Jack Blood was on Infowars, but like Jack Blood would bash all those people too, and so I kind of got into that like paleo conservative conspiracy, media hole for a bit because they were probably some of the only people who were constantly talking about 9/11, and it excited me at the time. But then, I mean, I think over time it was very clear that Alex Jones was turning, the 9/11 movement into basically something that he would act like was his own brand. He coined himself the godfather of the 9/11 truth movement, or
Thought it
grandfather,
was granddaddy.
something like that. Yeah. So
Okay.
he would act like it was his, and it did seem like he was feeding into that dogmatic righteousness that was plaguing the 9/11 truth movement at the time, where people would be really attached to these theories and figures rather than trying to like be, to have like a collaborative crowdsourced investigation of some kind, into 9/11. And I think it got much worse. And to me, it was much more evident when sort of We Are Change first started, where it did seem like Alex Jones had sort of spawned a collective of people who, some of the stuff they did was valuable. Like they would confront politicians about 9/11 in places you would never expect. But then on other times, you would be like, man, it seems like they're kind of perpetuating this very aggressive confrontational attitude where it's like, this might actually turn a lot of people off into thinking that 9/11 truthers are these crazy aggressive people who are going to get in your face and try to shout you down if you don't, you're not me hopper enough, or you're not,
Well,
so I think it's sort of, I noticed that attitude being amplified by Alex Jones and his followers more and more over time, and I think ultimately, that may have been one of the biggest problems in the movement. Not like Alex Jones. We could talk in another conversation about how Alex Jones might be some kind of asset for the federal government. That's a whole other conspiracy topic to discuss. But just on the level that he turned this into like a reptile brain clickbait, almost like conspiracy industry that he's obviously made millions and millions of dollars off of over time. I think it just shows sort of the, you can even just look at it from the perspective of he was a grifter who really took advantage of that energy and made people just really aggressive and gross and just dumbed it down,
you know,
So
it's funny. Luke Rukowski, who founded We Are Change, do you know who used to write the questions for him to ask of politicians? Me.
no.
It was me. I would write him questions, great questions for him to ask people he was planning on confronting. And he always got the questions wrong and, whatever. I mean, but I tried to be helpful, but then they turned out to be, they did some good work, I guess. It was just dependent upon the group. But the main group, or the one that got the most attention, seemed to do the most amount of damage. But yeah, they were all Alex Jones wannabes, and they were like Alex Jones's private little army that he had to go out and confront these people just to get on video. Like there were so many people who wanted so much to make these videos so that they would be put on Alex Jones's website just to see themselves on video. That seemed like to be the case to me, that some people just did things just so they would get on Alex Jones's website.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It became sort of like a cloud chasing thing. And it's interesting you even mentioned how Tucker was sort of like the litmus test to see how a truther would do if he's given the chance on TV, kind of a thing. And sort of fascinating to see where we are with Tucker now, where he's actually playing into like some kind of conspiracy movement that's like popular among right-wing people now. It's sort of odd, makes me wonder about him even more.
I don't trust him. I think he's an asset. of some kind. I've never trusted. I don't trust the media in general. The media is essentially an arm of the government, answerable to the White House, to the State Department, to the CIA, to the Pentagon. Bob McIlvaine, 9/11 family member Bob McIlvaine, did an interview with somebody from the Philadelphia Daily News, and by the time they were done their interview, the journalist told him the Pentagon will never allow this, to run. So, do you remember that movie, Good Night, Good Luck, with George Clooney, I think? Um,
Edward R. Murrow movie.
Edward R. Murrow. They had a scene where like the military came into the editor's desk or office and were trying to assert their influence over what story would be run or not run. So I mean, there's no question that those organizations I mentioned have a great influence over our media.
Yeah, well, and speaking of the media, and this is a little bit of a different topic, but on Bob McIlvaine, there was a long feature article about him in the Atlantic last year, written by Jennifer Senior,
Yep.
who just won the Pulitzer, and I believe it was specifically for that article.
Yep.
I was wondering if you had read that. I think you had actually teased it before I'd even seen it. You said something big is coming, and she does kind of try to. She's very sympathetic toward him in writing it, but she is also, tries to debunk, I would say, a little bit of what he says. So I was curious about your thoughts on that.
I think it was wrong of her to try to quote unquote debunk what Bob was saying. And again, I think maybe Bob could have stuck to maybe better topics than what he was bringing up. Like the ridiculousness of the 9/11 Commission. People have to understand the 9/11 Commission and their report were presented to the world as the definitive account of 9/11. And those are the exact words of Thomas Keane. So if you can show that the investigation that we got was an absolute farce, was absolutely corrupt and compromised, how can you say then that we know the truth of what happened that day? You can't. You can't say we know the truth because the investigation we got was an absolute farce. So that, I've always thought of that as being a smoking gun of 9/11, at least in terms of showing that we need absolute truth, accountability, and justice for what happened that day, because we didn't get it. The 9/11 Commission didn't hold anybody accountable. In the beginning, they wouldn't hold anybody under oath. And the families and 9/11 Citizens Watch, I think, ran an ad that embarrassed them into holding people under oath, which meant nothing because any of the people that were held under oath were not held accountable. And at the end, they said everybody is responsible, therefore